So my name is Chen. I'm a computer scientist by training, who sort of fell into ICTD during grad school. And during the last 15 years or so, I've been learning ICTD by doing ICTD. But I've only really been, reading and thinking about sustainability since about 2015, when, Barath invited me to one of the first Computing Within Limits workshops. And I attended that workshop and subsequent iterations, as well as a couple of the co-located ICT for Sustainability workshops. So that being said, I feel completely unqualified to speak about sustainability. But here I am, and here we are, and so here it goes. So Barath's talk was full of facts, numbers, math, graphs, scientific evidence. If you're not already convinced that we are in the end game now, I doubt that any more evidence will suffice. And Bonnie and Anjali already suggested alternative ways of thinking about growth and maybe post-growth or degrowth and maybe what we should do. So my talk won't really focus too much on that either. What my talk will do will be pictures and speculation of well, what's kind of stopping us in my personal opinion. And so sustainability or development is the title of my talk. And sustainability and development seem both to be urgent and complex problems. So, given the finite availability of resources, the two goals seem to be fundamentally at odds, right? Both of them, or at least development specifically, is a resource allocation problem. And now we're, asked to allocate even less resources potentially to development, and that, is going to cause some pushback from us psychologically. So can we do both? How do we choose? Are there synergies or alternative conceptualizations that can maybe help us reconcile these two goals? Obviously, I won't be able to unpack, much less answer, all of these questions in just a few minutes. So my goal is to share some observations about our situation and hopefully meander us through some interesting ideas. So the future is already here. It is not just, it's just not evenly distributed yet. So this is a great quote attributed to William Gibson, a popular cyberpunk science fiction author. And in this quote, Gibson expresses the primary themes of the uneven distribution of technological advancements and the presence of the future within the present. The original quote was, I think, meant to describe how if you look at advanced economies or countries, that's the future. And if you look at less developed places, that they're living in the past and somehow, aspiring to or progressing towards the future state of affairs. And so, futurists and science fiction fans and techno-utopians love this quote, but it's actually highly problematic from the ICTD perspective. As if you've taken any ICTD class or you've done some reading, you'll know why, and I'll talk more about it. So however, it's a very interesting reference point, and that's why I have it here, and I'll be coming back to this shortly. So as Bonnie and to some extent Anjali discussed in their talks, our notions of progress are strongly geared towards production, consumption, and growth. And that needs to change dramatically if we're to tackle sustainability in any meaningful way. This is literally an existential crisis. I, like I'm sure many other of the ICTD faculty here on the call, teach an ICTD course. And in my class, we asked students to learn a little bit about the history of development. We traced the history of various conceptualizations of development and progress, and raised questions about development's economic-focused, capitalistic, techno-deterministic, and paternalistic preconceptions. And we asked questions like, is GDP a good metric for development? Is technology really going to solve any problems? Should we be driving development in other countries? Or should we actually be doing development, in scare quotes, in rich countries to improve our own systems so that we're less consumptive, predatory, and extractive? All very good questions. The consensus that we as a field seem to have arrived at is that GDP is not the best metric. Technology can't solve by itself anything, but it may help sometimes, and that we can still do development as long as locals are involved, not only in terms of participation, but also in terms of driving the research agenda. So questions asked, questions answered, QED, and we're back in business, but now with additional nuance. But we're still doing development in poor countries. And so the fact that there's 60 or so people in this call interested presumably in ICTD suggests that despite our assumed intellectual understanding of the hazards of both development and technology as concepts, we're reluctant to dramatically change course. And why is that? Maybe we're just compassionate people, or we believe in equity, or maybe we have a savior complex. So Joyjit Pal's paper, Kai for Good or Good for Kai, has tried to surface this and related issues, and it's certainly worth introspecting about and being critical about within ourselves. Or maybe we're just stuck with our notion of progress. And because of it, we can't come up with any other way of getting to the future that we want, other than to replicate the forward trajectory and the future technologies of the West. So what does the future look like? If you Google for the future, and Google is the de facto truth now, most images look something like this. More stuff, more high tech, more everything, and everything faster. Again, others have written and today talked about this cornucopian paradigm, and Bonnie's work touches on a lot of this. As Barath mentioned, there are several widely cited studies that indicate that we actually have very little chance to stay below 2 degrees Celsius warming this century. And if we don't stay within 2 degrees, just one of the results that we'll be seeing is dramatic increases in extreme weather events, which we're probably already getting a sneak peek of today. So the future probably won't look like this, and it'll probably look more like this. And this is a photo from the 2020 Southern California fires. Or maybe it'll look something more like this. And this is a photo from the recent Texas winter storms and power outages. So Gibson is right, but not in the way that futurists imagine. The future is already here, and it's just not evenly distributed yet. According to a 2019 Pew Research survey, the majority of American adults actually already believe this to some extent, maybe because the evidence is literally all around us. Most Americans expect income inequality to worsen over the next 3 decades. Majorities say that the economy will be weaker, the nation's debt burden will be heavier, the environment will be in worse condition, healthcare will be less affordable than today. Most believe that the US will play a less important role in the world. About 2/3 predict that domestic political divisions will become more pronounced. So we're already kind of aware of this. And here is for fun is the number of post-apocalyptic films released each decade from Wikipedia. I'm not a film studies expert or a psychologist or sociologist, but I would posit that this geometric increase says something about our growing collective concerns. Also, I checked, and the number of films released each year in the US is increasing roughly linearly by comparison. So as a development or sustainability person, what is there to do? Are these two goals fundamentally at odds? After all, there are limited resources. In 2016, I co-authored a short paper to the ICTD conference outlining the relationship and likely convergence of issues between sustainability and development or undevelopment of first world countries and the development of third world countries. So I want to say that when I was invited to speak today, I immediately remembered this brilliant paper and I was going to present it. But actually, I had completely forgotten until Barath reminded me that we'd written this thing. So being a sustainability enthusiast, I went back and I dug up this paper to see if I could recycle it. I was curious to know in retrospect, did we get anything right? And are there any useful insights that I can present today? So this is the abstract. In this paper, we consider the computing needs of undeveloping regions, regions that were formerly developed or developing, but are unable to cope with fundamental limits. And then we contend that the ICTD community will have unique contributions to make in addressing these challenges. We obviously aren't the first to consider the collapse of civilizations in this paper, but the observation seems timely given what has happened since then. And so the parallels between development and undevelopment seemed apparent and worth considering at the time, but the reviewers evidently didn't agree. The paper was soundly rejected. The comments were to the effect of, in quotes, the precise definition of undeveloping areas is not clear, and you can practically include all nations, which I think entirely missed the point. In fairness, it probably was out of scope for ICTD. So why am I even bringing this up today? Mostly to feel vindicated, but also in part because it's a nice segue into a more systemic problem that I think our field and other people in general have, or people in general have, not other people, of being unable to see the forests for the trees. I, like many others, some very senior folks within ICTD and varied other fields have observed and lamented for quite a while now that our fields seem to be increasingly stuck doing incremental work, producing least publishable units on topics that don't really matter. Whereas ambitious, novel, or big ideas get nitpicked to death for superficially reasonable reasons. And there are various structural causes of this that I won't really get into, like the tenure process, the publication cycle, and so on. But I think there are also psychological reasons as well that prevent us from thinking bigger and more broadly. This wouldn't really be a concern. I would be happy to have people navel gazing all day, writing random papers, but the consequences of inaction are really dire. And given these major problems, we as privileged members of the academe need to really step up our game in a major way, because we can't rely on Mr. Elon Musk to terraform Mars. Maybe things are improving within ICTD with the reconception of ACM Dev as Compass, which is going to bring sustainability and crisis under the umbrella of social good. But I don't think it's going to be that easy. We as people, not just academics, tend to draw sharp disciplinary boundaries and are therefore unable to see relationships and the bigger picture. We're stuck in this dualistic thinking that goes back to Descartes or maybe Plato. And in ICTD, we're supposed to be interdisciplinary, but we're sort of just duct taped together like this. There's the people that do technical work, and there's the people that don't do technical work. And, oh, that stuff is interesting, but that's not what I do, and I don't really understand it from either side. And so this issue isn't really just an ICTD problem. Some very thoughtful HCI papers like some of Bonnie's work or the feminist HCI literature touches on some of these issues of dualism. But I don't know how much it really gets across because let's be real, who has time for this stuff? Only retirees and well academics like us. Arturo Escobar also has a great summary and discussion of this issue in his book, Designs for the Pluriverse, which he calls the three fundamental dualisms, the dominant form of Euromodernity, the divide between nature and culture, between us and them, and between subject and object. So basically, dualism seems to permeate Western thinking very broadly. I won't get into monism, but it has its own flaws. Everything is connected, as Bonnie mentioned, but not in a very flat way. So conceptually, our models should really look something more like this. I'm not a Taoist, but I think there's something to be learned from this. The world is composed of many different, sometimes opposing aspects that can coexist and even complement each other, with the seeds of the other included in each aspect. So, all boundaries are somewhat vague, and this is true of physical boundaries and of abstract category boundaries. And this is a quote from David Chapman, who has a blog called Meaningless that you should check out. So instead of thinking in terms of sustainability or development, maybe we should consider sustainability and development. And while that is the title of this X for D section, I don't think that we're really thinking in this way. So if we do reorient and broaden our view of who and what it is we are sustaining, rather than thinking about contexts as being separate, we could consider how they're related facets of the same systemic problems. And incidentally, that's what some of the papers that I've written have been doing. So coming back to the Carter quote that Barath showed, this change will either be made on our own initiative in a planned and rational way or forced on us with chaos and suffering by the inexorable laws of nature. What is chaos and suffering? Well, as we run out of cheap natural resources and climate change intensifies, economic pressures and environmental shocks will affect vulnerable populations. This future will consist of diminished socioeconomic well-being and decaying infrastructure punctuated by increasingly frequent humanitarian crisis as our current and future efforts to maintain growth result in increasingly extreme pressures. And so when these inevitable humanitarian or economic crises occur, the affected community will survive, suffer, die, or migrate. And as we've seen, this future is already happening during the Syrian conflict and refugee crisis subsequently. And so, who is it that's going to suffer the most? Well, it's typically the poor people, right? The people that have the least infrastructure, that are the most vulnerable to shocks of various kinds. But debatably, it's going to be the rich people too, because developed countries have no lower infrastructural equilibrium to rely on. When things come crashing down, we're going to fall a lot further. So if we think of collapse in this way, then crisis events are no longer signs of imminent collapse, but rather collapse events themselves. And thus the future is already here. And from this perspective, the field of crisis response is a reaction to collapse. The development is a reinforcement against collapse, and sustainability is an attempt to prevent future collapses. Interestingly, these three separate fields that focus on different population groups and timeframes are separate fields. But can you tell from this picture which of these three fields this problem belongs to? I certainly can't. So I think we have the same goals and we really should be learning from each other and working together a lot more. And so I wrote a paper in 2015 outlining the similarities and differences between these three fields and the various potential synergies. Here's a random list of commonalities in no particular order. And if you look at this list and you're an ICTD person, you're kind of already familiar with most of the issues on this list, right? And they're all issues of sustainability as well. So really, you are the potential experts. The sustainability folks have their own conceptions in mind. I won't get into their biases. But I wrote another paper in 2016 on the challenges and potential strategies moving forward. So, if you want more details, you can try to Google those and find both of the limits papers online. So other than the idea that crisis, development, and sustainability are related issues tied to the same underlying foundations, I guess I would like the key takeaways to be something like this. Recognize myopia and bias. I've only talked about one example. If you do, Google the Wikipedia page for cognitive bias, you'll see an even longer list than the list of the science fiction movies that I showed. Number two, be open-minded about disciplinary boundaries. Try to think bigger and broader. And if you're suffering from decision paralysis because you can't come up with something big enough, then do some small changes to salve your own psychology in the meantime. And then help and educate each other. And I guess as a plug for Limits 21, if you're interested in sustainability and basically joining a cult, come attend Limits 21. It's June 14 to 15 and it's virtual. So that's it for me. Thank you.